Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who have joined this webinar. My name is Catarina Albuquerque, and I am the happy CEO of SWA. We are very pleased to have you join this global event, especially our esteemed guests and ministers. This event is being live streamed and also made available through our social media channels. This event is made up of two parts. The first is to launch our new publication, namely the Handbook for Ministers of Finance, or more officially, the Water and Sanitation, How to Make Public Investment Work, a Handbook for Finance Ministers. The second part of this webinar will be dedicated to launch the preparatory process for the 2020 SWA Finance Ministers meetings. So it will all be about finance in the next 90 minutes or 87 minutes. Both events are linked, and I'm sure that our esteemed guest speakers will highlight those connections. We will be receiving your inputs, your questions, via the different chat platforms available in front of you, and we will try to address all questions and comments in the time dedicated for questions and answers. So before we start really with the substance, a few housekeeping rules or notes. We'd like to know who is joining us for this discussion. So we ask that you please add your names to the chat box, where you are joining from, and the names of anyone else who may be with you. This webinar, as I said, is 86 minutes long. We will have time for discussions, but you are welcome to leave comments or questions in the chat box, as I said, and we will come back to them towards the second part of the webinar. Before we hear from our presenters, I would like to say just a few words about this event and how important both parts of it are to what the partnership is doing. We are launching the handbook for finance ministers, and this was an idea presented and discussed in New Delhi at the margins of the Mahatma Gandhi Sanitation Convention, where our high-level chair met with several sector ministers who enthusiastically supported his proposal to prepare such a handbook and highlighted the need to provide ministers of finance with examples and evidence that WASH is a sector where it is worth investing. As you know, every dollar invested in water and sanitation brings at least a fourfold return. So this handbook aims to promote the vision our partners have of a world where, at the latest by 2030, and that's not that far away anymore, the human rights to water and sanitation are fully realized for all, always and everywhere. To transform our world, to use the title of the United Nations General Assembly resolution that approved the 2030 agenda, we must instill political will at all levels, national, regional, and global, promote multi-stakeholder approaches, strengthen systems and financial flows. These are all SWA objectives or strategic objectives for the next 10 years, and of course they also derive from the SDG framework. Bringing ministers of finance around the table is indeed crucial to reach all the above objectives, in particular to increase political will, to change systems, and to attract finance. Political decisions and policies made inside ministries of finance can have a considerable impact, positive impact, on the water and sanitation sector, as demonstrated by the examples from many countries presented in the handbook. There are many factors for success that must come together. Yet perhaps the one common factor we see recurring in every success story featured in the handbook being presented today is political leadership. Improvements in the sector need political leadership to inspire change and put new plans into action. Political decisions have a considerable impact on how finance flows to the sector, and they don't relate only with making funds available, but in changing specific bottlenecks that allow funds to be mobilized and flow to the sector. We cannot reach the goals without ministers like you that are aligned in what are the goals for the country and how to reach them. Ministers are the most essential gatekeepers for achieving a common vision to turn the sector into a success. Hence, we keep bringing ministers of finance around the table in our finance ministers meeting to demonstrate how WASH is indispensable to achieve sustainable development, to progressively reduce or eliminate inequalities and poverty, empower women and girls, attract investments, and make economies thrive. In 2020, our FMM, Finance Ministers meeting, will obviously be connected with and will debate COVID and post-COVID recovery plans, health, climate, and other topics. But more of that later. So before I move on to the people that you really want to listen to, let me just take some time to acknowledge, congratulate, and thank the authors of the handbook. Catarina Fonseca, Bill Kingdom, Victoria Delman, and Leslie Porris for their extraordinary, dedicated, and enthusiastic work. Let me also thank my team for having supported them heavily in making it happen. Finally, and most importantly, I invite you to open page 47 of the handbook. I think I made a mistake. Sorry, give me just a second. Okay, page 47 of the handbook, and look at the long list of 54 names of individuals and institutions. This is exactly what being a partnership means, and an excellent indicator of engagement. This page 47, makes us at SWA especially proud, as it shows the dedication, the pro bono contributions and commitments of our very busy partners to making the handbook become a reality and contribute to accelerating the much needed progress on SDG 6. Many have contributed with case studies, have answered our questions, digged to get more information, among other things. So thanks so much to all of you. Now I will call on our honorable speakers who will give you even more context and provide us with some inspiring, practical, real-life stories where political leadership has definitely been key for success. I will first call on our dear high-level chair, the Honourable Kevin Rudd, 26th Prime Minister of Australia, who is the main driver, as I have told you before, behind this handbook that we are launching today, to take the floor. Kevin, please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Katarina, and greetings to all who are joining us in this important gathering online today. I bring you greetings from Australia, where I am at the present. For those of us who are still in New York, greetings to you there, but to all of our friends and colleagues from around the world. And I'd like to particularly acknowledge our two participating ministers at the outset, the Minister for Finance of Nigeria, Minister Ahmed, and the Water and Sanitation Minister of Nigeria as well, Minister Adamu. Ministers, I would say to both of you that the reason why we have done this handbook is to try in our own modest way to make your job just a little bit easier, and to make your ministerial counterparts' jobs a little bit easier around the world. I've served in politics myself, and politics is not easy. And particularly at a time of international political crisis, particularly at a time when the global economy is under pressure, and particularly at a time, therefore, when government revenues are down and not up. And so I understand the political pressures that you must be under. And therefore, one of the reasons for producing a Finance Minister's Handbook is to make it easier for you around the cabinet table and in your discussions with your prime ministers and your presidents to explain, firstly, that water, sanitation and hygiene projects are financeable and fundable and through creative ways. And secondly, that the economic, financial and political dividend for doing the right investments and doing those investments in the right way actually bring about great rewards in themselves. And so my simple message as someone who has been a prime minister of his own country before is mindful of each and every one of your high-level political responsibilities, that there are ways, even in these current circumstances, that we can finance water, sanitation and hygiene. And secondly, that your cabinet colleagues and your heads of government can understand that it won't break the bank, it won't break the finance ministry. There are creative ways of doing it. Furthermore, if you get the investments right, these are enormous job-creating opportunities as well. And once the water flows and the sanitation systems are connected, then the political benefit follows as well, as the people see the changes that have been made for themselves, their families, and their communities. This has long been a passion of mine, as Katerina has indicated. I am sorry for being such a determined global chair in seeking to bring this Finance Minister's Handbook into fruition. So to all of you in the international community, you can blame me for this publication. I take full responsibility for all the problems that it has created. But I've had a very simple reason for doing so, and that is the answer to Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which is sanitation and water for all, is finance, finance, and finance. And therefore, exploring in very practical ways how we can go about achieving that around the world is, I think, the most critical next step in ensuring that we have universal access to these critical services for all members of the human family. So I personally make no apology for being a complete pain in the you-know-where in order to bring this thing about. Secondly, if I could really thank Katerina Albuquerque, the CEO of Sanitation Water for All, and for all the governments around the world and the agencies who support our work at SWA and at UNICEF. Katerina, thank you for your leadership on this project. And through you also, if I could also particularly acknowledge those authors of the report that you just mentioned. If I could emphasize again, Katerina Fonseca, Bill Kingston, who I've met in London and first introduced him to my passion for this, Victoria Delman, and of course, Leslie Porries as well. Thank you as the authors, because I know it's not easy to produce a quality document. And all those others who Katerina mentioned before to have made this publication possible, I thank you very much for your support and for your editorial contributions. Let me just say this in conclusion, Katerina, because we want to hear from the ministers, because they're the ones in office making these decisions. The whole purpose of this document is to look at 4 areas in which we can work in order to make a material difference through this great publication. And they are these. Number 1, to maximise value from existing public funding of sanitation and water and hygiene projects. And there are practical ways in which that can be done through the reform of these sectors within your economies. And the book, the handbook, goes to practical examples drawn from countries around the world as to how that can be done. Number 2, objective. How do we go about mobilising more public investment for these projects for the future, and in a way which produces an effective result for public finance and an efficient result also for the delivery of these services to the community. Objective number 3, increasing repayable domestic finance. And that, of course, is where we've got a more fully reformed sector and where other providers of finance, including private sector finance and community-raised finance, can generate returns on investment for these critical projects. And number 4, our objective is to encourage innovation and in the new and least explored areas of finance raising, for example, by using social impact bonds, by using climate fund adjustment funds, etc. So these are the 4 core sets of objectives we have. But rather than just talk about it theoretically, what I'm really delighted about, and thank the authors of the report for their work in bringing this about, is that we give practical examples from governments and from ministries and from sectors from around the world as to how these can be done. So, Katerina, I will conclude my remarks there. I'm delighted that we are launching this important document. And to all ministers who are participating in this gathering, please do me a favour. Next time you meet your Prime Minister or your President, just walk into the room carrying this under your arm and saying, you know, boss, we can make this work. We can actually deliver better sanitation water services, and I can also help you get re-elected on the way through. Thank you very much, Katerina, and over to you for the rest of our program.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you for the inspiring words. And also thank you for joining us so late already for you in Australia. We know that you are passionate about it. We know that you boss us around, but we are very happy and proud about it. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, it's my honor and pleasure to give the floor to the Honorable Zainab Ahmed, the Minister of Finance, of Budget and National Planning of Nigeria. Your Excellency, you have the floor. Your Excellency, I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is Katarina again. Can you do us a favor? In order for your words to be interpreted into Spanish and French, I need to ask you to please click on an icon that you will see at the bottom of your screen with a little globe. It looks like a globe, and then please click English.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yes, good.
Thank you. Please go on. Thank you so much, and sorry for the interruption.
Let me just start again by thanking you, Katharina, for arranging this, and also especially thanking Mr. Kevin Rood for the great work that all of you have been doing. And also to thank my colleague, the Honorable Minister of Water Resources, for his unrelenting and unapologetic push for both water and sanitation improvements in our country. He has been on my case for quite a long time, and I'm really glad that this is progressing today, and I do value this handbook that has been produced. Investing in water is helping us to meet the SDGs on water and sanitation for all. Investing in water is investing in our people. It will yield significant economic dividends. It will have direct impact on improvement in our GDP. The Nigerian Economic Recovery and Growth Plan has 3 pillars. The first pillar is investing in our people, which means investment in health, in education, in water and sanitation, and also in the social investment of people to help the poor and the vulnerable. The second pillar is security and welfare of the people. Again, this is also directly linked with the first pillar, which is investing in our people, because you need to make sure that your people are secure for you to be able to take care of their welfare. The third pillar is economic growth, and economic growth is also directly linked with investing in our people, because you have to make sure your people are healthy, they're well, for them to be able to be productive and increase their capacity to produce and contribute to economic growth. Financing for development is financing investments in health, in water, and as well as in sanitation. When we invest in water, we have a tool that we have launched in Nigeria. It's called the ISDN, that is able to make us simulate the impact on all of the 17 SDGs when you invest in one aspect of the SDGs. And the ISDN tool shows us that you actually get the greatest impact when you invest in water and in sanitation. And I'll give you an example. It improves our health outcomes. It also improves, of course, very obviously on sanitation, but it improves school outcomes, also the performance of children and the turnout of children in school. In our case, we found that girls have lower performance in participation in education, especially level and the secondary level. And one of the reasons for that was lack of sufficient water and sanitation. An average of 1 week of school days in a month because there is no water when she's having her period, not allow her to go to school, so she stays at home. So imagine the impact of the education of that child when she's missing an average of 1 week in a month because there are no adequate water and sanitation facilities in the school. So we have taken this as a great challenge. We are using as much government resources as possible. We're also trying to use government resources to catalyze private sector funding. We have a lot of support from development partners concentrated on providing improved water and sanitation facilities. Nigeria, unfortunately, has one of the lowest HDI, Human Development Index, globally. And the poorest measurement is in health and in education. And in health is directly related to inadequate provision of water. So there's a lot of work that we have to do in Nigeria. That's where I'm really excited about this, because we're seeing from this lessons from other countries on how we can improve more reform in the public financial management to be able to conserve resources and apply those resources to water and sanitation. I've seen also examples on how we can catalyze private sector funds to invest in the water sector. And I do agree with you, Mr. Kevin, investing in the water and sanitation is profitable investment. So you can do a package of business that is actually bankable and profitable. We also need to do a lot more in terms of innovative financing. So this publication has shown us some of the innovative financing mechanisms that we can adopt. We already have floated 3 sets of green bonds so far, investing in various government projects that are green, and a lot of them are actually water-related projects. We'll be exploring this opportunity of a social impact bonds as another opportunity to fund water and sanitation sector in our community. I hope that in the next development plan that we are preparing, that we will end up having achieved most of the targets that are set in the Nigeria Economic Development Plan, and this would mean that we will have to spend more money in the water sector, but I hope that will be done in a manner that is sustainable. Finally, I just want to also flag the fact that in Nigeria, we are a federation, and that means we have a federal government, we have state governments, and we have local governments. And by the provisions of our constitution, responsibilities are shared. So while the federal government, I'm sure my colleague in Water Resources can explain this better, can build major dams and major distribution networks, the responsibility of providing water to homes, to premises, is that of the states, and even in some cases that of the local government. So we have, it's a significant limitation. So it means we have to work more in terms of cooperation with the states and the local government in improving water facilities. Because while we take a dam into a state, the state has to be responsible for the last mile distribution as well as for the maintenance and running of the dams. And we have a lot of gaps in that area that the Ministry of Water Resources is working to bridge. I'd like to stop here at this time and look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. It was a pleasure to listen to you, and it was an honor to have you join us. And we are very happy that you read the handbook and liked the handbook. Thank you so much. And it's now my great pleasure and also honor to introduce you to an old friend of SWA, or a long-standing friend of SWA, Minister Adamo, who is the Minister of Water Resources in Nigeria. Your Excellency, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Katrina. Good evening once again, Mr. Kevin Rudd, and good morning, my colleague, Susanna Ahmed, Minister of Finance, Katrina, and all the participants. It's quite a pleasure that we're able to sit together with the Ministry of Finance today in this international forum to discuss the issue of WASH, and it's particularly significant to us here because it clearly is the proof that he and my sister were working together on this issue. Quite a number of challenges, especially with the COVID-19, but one of the things we're doing is to really take advantage, in a way, of the need to fight the pandemic, to send the message across again on why sanitation, water, sanitation, and hygiene are very important to our lives. I'm very happy that my colleague made mention of the federal structure of the country. We have subnational governments, 36 of them, plus the federal capital territory, 774 local government administrations. And it's been a huge challenge getting this message across. But the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, sort of scared everybody, and all these issues about hand washing and keeping yourself and environment clean have further helped to bring before the importance of water, sanitation, and hygiene. Obviously, financing the sector has been quite a huge challenge, and I'm very, very happy. I welcome this effort by the SWA to I've attended so many of your meetings over the last 5 years, starting with the one in Addis Ababa in 2016. And I've seen how we've been working tenaciously to build up a plan, a generic plan that will be applicable to all countries of the world towards improving WASH. And of course, the biggest challenge has always been financing. And I think this handbook has maybe it's a major step towards addressing that challenge and hopefully getting a way around the issue of limitation of resources, because this is a sector that hardly attracts investment. Of course, there is poor service, poor delivery, and usually the private sector does not see any healthy returns on their investment. But I think the experience of India with the Shwar Bharat mission has shown that a whole new economy can be created around WASH. And I hope this handbook will further stimulate that process. I'll share with you some of the things that we've been doing in terms of trying to move away from total reliance on national budget and state budgets. One key thing we're doing currently, in addition to all the efforts we've made to work with microfinance institutions, is also that we've created in November last year what we call organized private sector WASH forum. That means government, my ministry in particular, is working with the organized private sector to be able to see how we can make some more mileage towards achieving our goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, especially Goal 6.2. with specific reference to open defecation. And a lot is happening. Recently, we have had working with the Ops Watch, we call it Ops Watch, and the Nigeria Diaspora Commission, because Nigeria is a country that has a lot of citizens that are outside the country, and we need lots of remittances on an annual basis, and we're trying to leverage some of that fund that is available from Nigerians in the diaspora. There is a program that we're going to launch called Operation, I think we call it Flush It. The idea is for our citizens in the diaspora to adopt toilets back home in Nigeria and support some other wash initiatives that we have. Of course, our PWASH program also has a component of water sanitation entrepreneurship in it. And we're testing the waters very soon. We're going to start with a couple of projects, pilot projects, to see how that works. But I would like to say that there is as the Minister of Finance said, there is a very, very strong cooperation between us and even with the National Assembly, because that's the other area. The Parliament is also always an issue. But through some persuasion and, like I said, also the threat of this COVID pandemic, I think even the parliamentarians have come to appreciate the work that we're doing. And to a large extent, we negotiate our budget very well, and we don't seem to be getting some of the problems that we've been getting before. But I must thank also the Finance Minister, because recently a economic stimulus package was initiated by our President Buhari, and water and sanitation featured very much prominently there. And we put our plans for what we think we can do as part of our own efforts to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we got 95% of the funds we requested for. So I would like to say thank you to the Minister. And this is a further demonstration of cooperation that is between us. I don't want to say too much. I think the Minister of Finance has said quite a lot. Just to say again that I'm happy with this handbook. And I'm also glad that clearly my colleagues is excited about it. And after this meeting, obviously, we're going to get to talk some more, and we'll work together to see what areas we can further expand on the experiences of other countries, open new vistas and new opportunities, in addition to the efforts that we're making currently towards that. So thank you, and thank you, Mr. Ward and Katerina, for all your effort and all the participants. We're also having late dinners. Bon appetit. For the rest of us, have a good day.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. And yes, we are indeed waiting for lunch, many of us. Thank you for your intervention, and thank you for your long-standing support, of course, and for the work that you do in your country, but the way in which you also inspire so many of us outside your country. So thanks to the high-level speakers that participated in this first part of this webinar. I would, since we are running, I would say 15 minutes late, now I'm going to ask the following speakers to try to keep their presentations a bit shorter. Somebody has to pay the price, isn't it? So I'll give immediately the floor to Catarina Fonseca. Both Kevin Rudd and I already mentioned her. She's the SWA advisor on finance, one of the authors of the handbook, and she will talk about the handbook. Catarina, go ahead.
Thank you, Katerina, Your Excellencies, colleagues. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you to launch this handbook. I'm representing my co-authors, Bill Kingdom, Victoria Delman, and Leslie Forrest. But as already mentioned by Katerina, this has been a very large effort from many partners around the world, from many cabinets, from many treasury colleagues as well. So thank you for all your inputs. Next slide, please. So we keep hearing about the finance gap in the sector and the problems to mobilize funding, but we forget that it has worked in many countries. So we try to bring the best state-of-the-art knowledge around this area, what has worked in terms of funding the sector, and especially urgent in the time of the impact of COVID in the water sector. And I have to say that it was much more difficult to collect cases for sanitation and wastewater management than it was for water. But we did it, we managed, and we hope that we provide inspirational case studies for both finance ministers, line ministers, and all their technical teams. Next slide, please. So why finance? Why a handbook on finance for the sector? The latest WHO and UNICEF estimates show us that achieving universal basic services will require 2 times the progress rate that we've had till now. 2 times, but this is not it. Next slide, please. Reaching the much more ambitious targets of safely managed water and sanitation by 2030 will require 4 times the historic rate of progress. And besides this, next slide, please. Besides, we know that there's progress in access to services, but we also have reports from many different countries, again, excellent report by WHO and UNICEF, that inequalities in access to services is also increasing in some countries. Next slide, please. And now let's go to the positive numbers, because that's what we hear. That's what ministers of finance also like to hear. Katerina already mentioned, we have for every dollar invested in the sector, we have a 4-time return. In the document, you have about 10 references of what the rewards are, from dignity for all, wealthy people, Minister Hamed already mentioned some of them, but also resilience to climate variability and the impact that has on economic growth. It's all in there. I only have now 5 minutes to explain everything in the handbook. Next slide, please. I'm going to show you my favorite image in the whole handbook. In countries with improved access to safe water and sanitation services, we see an annual average growth of the GDP of 3.7%, while in countries without access to safe water and sanitation services, the annual average GDP growth is 0.1%. Now, we don't know which one is the chicken or the egg, but we do know that many of the targets of SDG 6 are linked with other targets in the 2030 agenda. And I think there's something there of mutually reinforcing each other. Next slide, please. So what is the content of the handbook? As already mentioned by Kevin Rood, we have mainly 4 areas where finance ministers can really improve water and sanitation for millions of people. They can support policies in 4 areas. The first one is maximizing the value of existing public funding. We have found that what mobilizes more resources in absolute numbers is incentivizing sector performance, improving subsidy targets, lots of savings that can be gained there, and promoting better coordination with sector planning and public financial management as well. Finance ministers can also mobilize more funding through setting up adequate cost recovery policies, reforming tariffs, introducing earmark taxes, and establishing an array of options for cross-subsidization. These are definitely the measures that are the least politically popular, let's put it that way. But together with maximizing value of existing public funding, we found cases where these two definitely mobilize the most resources. Then the other areas of intervention are increasing repayable domestic finance to creating mechanisms that to reduce the perceived risks of investing in the sector, pooling finance at national, municipal, and household levels. We have several examples of these pooled funds. And finally, encourage innovation in least explored approaches. And we have here the climate funds, and also mentioned by Minister Hamed, the social impact bonds. Now, we could find much less evidence on these 2 last approaches as well. And I think the most important message here is that the ability of low and middle income countries to mobilize additional finance and repayable finance, also to go to the more innovative and least explored approaches, it's highly dependent on the ability of the sector to demonstrate that it is using effectively the existing funding. So next slide, please. I have to speed up now. I cannot go into this. I just want to say that for each of these areas that I mentioned, we have a case. Actually, we have several cases, and we have about 20 of them. I'm looking at my timer. I cannot go through them. Next slide, please. Well, there's amazing data with the amounts of finance raised. I'm going to say there's different elements, different recipes, cooking books, where you can see what is most adaptable to your country. Next slide, we'll have to go through the cases, which you can find. You can find Philippines, South Korea within 1 generation, universal coverage. You can find out how they did it. Next, please. Wastewater discharge, environmental fees in Costa Rica. Next one is Mali, with actually just really understanding how much money is going to the sector and being able to influence cabinet and increase the budgets. Next one, please. Okay, so one of the questions that, these are my last 2 slides. One of the questions that we got a lot when we were reviewing the handbook was, okay, so, but where do we start? How is this handbook helping us? How can we start? And I really think it depends on the country's starting position. And that's why we put the 4 intervention areas along the line of less reform required and more reform required. Next slide, please. So for more traditional sources of funding, they require less reforms in the sector. The more innovation and repayable finance, then we have higher requirements instead of the foundational issues, instead of the enabling environment. If the sector is already reformed, finance ministers can help to develop financial markets that support the sector and efforts to improve efficiency in the sector. If the sector is reformable or willing to reform, finance ministers may support with financial incentives to actually deliver better governance, better public financial management in the sector, and also encourage easier access to market finance. If the sector is not, at least at the moment, reformable as a whole, finance ministers can provide targeted support to parts of the sector that are willing to improve. For instance, utilities in large towns tend to push the sector as the first movers in improvements through well-designed incentives and subsidies. And this is my last slide. Next, please. There is an array, the communication team of SWA develops small videos, images, very easy to use communications. There's a link, you'll be able to access it, to use the handbook and all its elements as an advocacy tool. Wherever you are, civil society, wherever you are, local government, national government, development partner, research, you have a role to play and you can start speaking more finance in the sector. It's very easy. If you don't know how much money you need to raise, you first need to cost how much you need. There's also a costing tool. And on top of this, SWA is setting up the Systems of Finance Working Group to support developing influencing strategies for finance, both at national, regional level, support to the finance ministers meeting preparatory process. We will hear more about that later, and also try to match some of the technical assistance from the partnerships. It's early days, you will be hearing more about it. Thank you very much for hearing me. Thank you, Katerina. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Katerina. I know it was a bit unfair to give you so little time. I was going to ask everyone to follow us on social media and look at the videos and the GIFs and all the things that the SWA communications team prepared, because it really helps to introduce you to the handbook and start, and they are great teasers to attract you to, if you need any more arguments, to look into the handbook. So thank you so much to all the speakers, and this first phase of the webinar is over and it's closed. So thank you to everyone, and please do use the handbook, and please be in touch with us, in particular regarding the 3 last issues that Katerina F mentioned. Let me now move to the second part on the finance ministers' meetings. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Paul Deverel, who is a senior WASH advisor at the FDCO, and not anymore DFID. It's the first time that I don't introduce you as DFID, Paul. And he's also the chair of our high-level political dialogue working group, meaning Paul is the one who moves the strings and talks with people and to finalize and to work on the agenda and the concept note and the briefing note for the finance ministers' meeting. Paul, can you keep your intervention to as little as possible? We are running already 17 minutes late.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Katerina. Yeah, it's Paul from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. That's new to me. I'll get used to it. Don't worry. It's business as usual. Just like to point out that that handbook is a handbook for all of us, not just the hand ministers. It's really excellent. And congratulations to the other Katerina and to others who've been involved. And also, by the way, I don't work alone with this high-level political dialogue working group. I work with a set of very fine colleagues who together we try and use our collective thoughts to try and shape things, including the finance ministers meeting. I'm going to talk to you for about 5 minutes about the finance ministers meeting. So please bear with me. I'll run through quite a few slides in short order. It's going to be different. There's going to be 3 regional virtual finance ministers covering 3 big regions: Asia, Africa, and Latin America and the Caribbean. We're going to be working with global partners, including UNICEF and the World Bank. You'll hear from them later, and also some regional partners as well, the various development banks. That's absolutely great, but also leading political regional organizations like AMCAO, ASEAN, and the Organization of American States. Yeah, we're going regional, and that's really important. Next slide, please. We're not going to forget everything we learned, though. We're using a similar format, and we're building on the work we did earlier in the year when we had the original ideas for finance ministers' meetings in April. We're using that. Next slide. Now, the objective of the meeting is pretty fundamental. The whole idea is how we work together to support finance ministers and collaboratively figure out how to make those smart investments that the other Katerina was just talking about, given the fact that WASH will play a central role, not only in COVID, but also in longer term issues associated with climate and economic development. Yeah, building forward better. That's what it's all about. Next slide. Some objectives, possibly too many. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just some key points here. The first thing, WASH can deliver huge employment opportunities, which is pretty critical to get economies working again as they move ahead of that first wave of COVID. We're going to demonstrate how those new services can actually act on health, but also act in other sectors as well. But the health link is absolutely important with outcomes at household and institutional level as well. We're going to demonstrate opportunities, how to mobilize additional funding. Again, remember that slide presented by Katerina, moving down the left of those slide, looking for more and better ways to mobilize finance. And we're really going to link up with some of those key lessons from the Financial Minister's Handbook with practical actions that finance ministers can take using their influence, using politics and using public funds to mobilize domestic finance and create the intersectoral synergy which brings together WASH and health, not least to help with COVID. So a set of objectives, ambitious, that's how we should be. Next slide. Positioning the finance ministers, well, I think they're pretty well positioned at the moment. These will be the go-to event for finance ministers to work with others so that we can understand those opportunities around WASH and really ensure that WASH plays the maximum role it can do as governments tackle COVID-19. It's going to be built around a compelling vision, which is going to look at the issues of employment opportunity and resilience and health and economic benefits which can result from investment in WASH. And we're going to be supported by some of the top leaders we have, including from UNICEF and the World Bank, you'll hear from two later, and regional development banks as well. Next slide. The three specific outcomes. Firstly, we would like to persuade finance ministers of key opportunities to build forward better using WASH as a key part of their post-COVID recovery strategy, especially focusing on those employment, health, and other opportunities that we discussed earlier. We're also wanting to really build this as an opportunity for collaboration, where finance ministers are not seen as kind of isolated champions of WASH, but really as the focal point for collaboration, which brings all sectors together. And finally, that ministers should lead the virtual meetings with a clear appreciation of the opportunities that exist, practical opportunities to make this happen, building on some of those case studies which Caterina Fonseca has identified earlier. Next slide. Just a few practical tips, you might be interested. There's more which can be shared online and is available on the SWA website. Each meeting is going to be 2 to 3 hours. They're going to be held at 2-week intervals in the period November, December, starting I think on November the 4th. The event's going to not just be isolated and focus on finance ministers, we will bring together also a number of WASH sector ministers and their health counterparts if they're not already health. But the focus is finance ministers. And learning from the past, the finance ministers' meetings will not be a kind of technocratic-driven masterclass in WASH, but it's going to pick up on those compelling experiences and evidence to illustrate the way forward. Next slide. The structure of the meetings. Well, it's going to be there's 2 panel discussions followed by questions. The first one looks at WASH as a key part of national COVID recovery. And the second one is longer term, how to make best use of public funds to really mobilize, to engage and to move ahead quickly. So how to make best use of those public funds. Next slide. And that's about it. I was asked to keep it short, and I hope I've done so. But if there's any questions, please do get in touch with the SWA Secretariat and follow preparations on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Thank you very much. We'll take any questions later as well. Thank you. Caterina.
Thank you so much, Paul, for having explained it, for having summed it up. I think it was very clear. Next slide, please. Before I move forward, I would like to show you this visual representation of what Paul just said. We will have 2 global co-conveners along with the SWA and its UNICEF and the World Bank. And then we will have for each region at least 1 regional co-convener. So here are the dates and here are the logos of those who are partnering with us already at the regional level. We are still, as Paul said, in conversations with the Organization of American States as well as with ASEAN. I will now move well, of course, thank all the co-conveners for partnering with us. Some of you have been partnering with us for a long time. Some of you even host our secretariat. And this is a good segue for me to introduce Ms. Kellyanne Naylor, who is the Associate Director of the WASH section inside UNICEF. Kelly, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Caterina, Excellencies. As UNICEF, we're really excited this year to be a co-convener together with the World Bank and really, as was said, building on their leadership and the success of the past meetings. For me, this cycle of the finance ministers meeting is coming at a really specific time in history. I think, first of all, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. And as we've all known, water, sanitation, and hygiene interventions and systems have really been on the front lines of this response to the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it's healthcare facilities, what's on the tip of all of our tongues with the reopening of schools for 1.6 billion children over these coming weeks are the broad-based hand hygiene for all initiatives. I think we've all seen that hospitals can't treat all the world's population as a patient, and we need water, sanitation, hygiene, and public health measures. I think the second thing that this finance ministers meeting is coming at a time when we've now entered the 10 years before 2030, which has been known also as the decade of action for the Sustainable Development Goals. So it really puts us in perspective where we have both an immediate urgency, but also we have in sights our long-term target. So we also really welcome this opportunity to have these 3 regional meetings and this online virtual format. I think, as Paul said, this really gives us a fantastic opportunity to better link countries, regional communities and development banks, and a global sector dialogue. And as UNICEF, we're fully committed to this preparatory process that Paul's laid out, with both the preparation, the meeting itself, and most importantly, the follow-up after the meetings to make sure that this really creates lasting change at country level. Also, alongside the finance ministers meeting, UNICEF is also really excited to support SWA to take forward Objective 3 of the strategic framework, which is looking at strengthening systems and financing as interim chair of the working group. This new working group will certainly strengthen the collaboration between global partners and SWA member countries to be able to really work together once and for all to solve these financing bottlenecks, which we know it's absolutely fundamental, first and foremost, to address the performance of the sector, strengthening the 5 building blocks, which are so foundational for effective and efficient WASH services and systems. So we're pleased to be working together, leading this initiative, and more coming soon. Yesterday, Katerina and I were discussing that we needed to engage ourselves to work even harder to reach others outside of our WASH sector. So I really wanted to just take this opportunity to thank the authors of this handbook and the Honorable Kevin Rudd for your vision. It's inspired us and, most importantly, equipped us to be much more effective advocates for the sector to finance ministers and heads of state. This is the moment now. The case for WASH has been made, and let's really work together to achieve our dream of water, sanitation, and hygiene for all. Very much looking forward to walking together on our WASH finance journey. Thank you very much, and Katerina, back over to you.
Thanks so much, Kelly, for your energy and enthusiastic support. I will move now forward to Ms. Jennifer Serra, who is the Global Director of the Water Global Practice at the World Bank. And again, we are very happy with your support and with having this great trio at the global level of Kelly, Jennifer, well, and from our side, myself, pushing for the 3 FMMs. Jennifer, you have the floor. Are you there, Jennifer? Jennifer? Yes, we can. Sorry, can you please click the globe? Are you on an iPad? There should. Okay, then there should be something saying more. Do you see more? Click on the more and put the English, and then put English. Choose English. Spark Street. What do we do? I'm talking with, okay. Go on. Yes, go ahead, go.
also for Kevin Rudd to really have the vision for this handbook. He came to the World Bank, he talked to our then CEO, and asked us to really participate. And we're delighted to participate, to produce the handbook. It came out as such a really, really useful book with so many good case studies. At the bank, we are very pleased to support the finance minister's series of meetings, especially in this post-COVID era. And we remain even more committed than ever to participate at the global and also importantly at the country level to provide the evidence-based advocacy, to raise awareness, to engage political leaders at the highest level, to unleash the financing that's needed for universal access to water and sanitation. As the ministers have highlighted, while the COVID-19 has revealed the vulnerabilities, first of all, the many people do not have access to service, but also the vulnerabilities of utilities and service providers whose revenues have dropped between 30 and 70% within the first couple months of the pandemic. We heard last time at the in-person finance ministers meetings from Jerson Kelman, the then CEO of Sabesp, the Sao Paulo water utility, how precarious already water utilities are. So the importance of not just investing in the sector, but investing in the institutions that deliver services that can sustain services in the long run. We all know business as usual won't work anymore in WASH. We need strong collective action. We need to link best practice, knowledge, and research. We need to build on countries who are committed, who have achieved success. Success breeds success. As in the case of Nigeria, we see that we can get an all-of-government commitment. Minister Adamu also mentioned India, and India has shown in a very short period of time that it's possible through their flagship Swachh Bharat program of Prime Minister Modi, that political commitment and leadership at the highest level, combined with public finance, partnerships, and sound policies, can turn the needle in making India virtually open defecation-free in 4 short years. We are actually delighted to welcome back to the World Bank Group Global Practice Mr. Payam Iyer, who served as the Principal Secretary to the Water and Sanitation Ministry of the Government of India for the past 4 years, and who many of you met and know from the international workshop. He will be actively engaged and working with us in this FFM initiative. So finally, what we want to do is we're committing the World Bank to this process in 4 areas. Mobilizing countries at the country level to unite behind a common government program. In this regard, we're going to work with UNICEF, UN agencies, Global Financing Facility, key NGOs, other partners, help amass the evidence to really convince ministers of finance that they can invest in this sector. It pays off in economic and social terms, creates jobs. Number 3, provide on-the-ground technical assistance to design large-scale, efficient programs, and mobilize the financing from public and private sector from our colleague and fellow partner IFIs. And finally, really important, and thank you, Katarina, for this, is connecting countries together to learn and share experiences through this type of forum. So we're committed, we're motivated, and we're ready to work with all of you in achieving water and sanitation for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for your enthusiasm and support. I think that we need to measure who speaks faster, whether it's Kelly, you, or me. I still don't know.
I'm sorry about the translation too.
But you are making a good effort, both of you. So thank you to our dear global co-conveners for, you can see the support and the engagement. We are constantly in contact about this and other issues in order to make the vision of the SDGs a reality even ahead of time. And because we are running late, I will immediately hand over the floor to Ms. Marissa Striley, who is SWA Secretariat Technical Advisor, who will tell you a little bit about the prep process. After Marissa speaks, we will have 10 minutes for questions and answers, and then we will be very proud and happy to hand over the floor to SWA Steering Committee Chair, Mr. Patrick Moriarty, to share with you some concluding observations. Marissa, over to you.
Thank you, Katarina. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Even though the finance minister meeting looks a little bit different now, there's still many elements of our preparatory process that we began earlier in the year, which we can sort of reignite and adapt and move forward with. So I will move forward with that. The objectives of the preparatory process are to demonstrate and highlight the economic opportunities and benefits offered by the water, sanitation, and hygiene sector, specifically in areas like generating employment, contributing to a healthy workforce, strengthening social and economic development for all, GDP growth, and protecting and preparing populations for climate change. Another is to mobilize political leaders to identify and agree on areas for smart investments in the water, sanitation, and hygiene sector during and after COVID-19, to develop and strengthen partnerships that support ministers responsible for finance and sector ministers to work together in achieving the necessary reforms, attracting additional resources, and delivering at-scale services for all, especially for the marginalized and vulnerable communities. And finally, to secure long-term engagement from participants and concrete results through the SWA Mutual Accountability Mechanism by tabling and reviewing smart commitments made through the government-led multi-stakeholder national planning processes to reach the desired water, sanitation, hygiene, health, and positive economic outcomes. So given those objectives, our outcomes for the preparatory process are that we're expecting finance ministers to understand the contribution of the sector to the economic and human development and commit to prioritizing it within the national planning and resource allocation processes. And that during dialogues with key economic players, including the private sector and other potential investors, they're encouraged to prioritize the poor and vulnerable. Next, finance ministers identify initiatives for working together with ministers responsible for water, sanitation, hygiene, and commit their support through improved financial policies, including adequate taxation regimes, public resource allocation, and leveraging of development finance. Next, sector stakeholders agree actions that they will take to contribute to finance priorities of the government and to leave no one behind. And finally, sector ministers take the lead in mobilizing additional finance, improving cost recovery, undertaking reforms to make the sector fit for investments, and acting as champions for the sector within the country to leave no one behind. So given those objectives and outcomes, on this slide, you see a set of suggested activities that could take place during the preparatory process. We always stress the importance of multi-stakeholder dialogues and joint activities, and it's no different in the preparatory process. Many of these activities should look very familiar, considering they are what we had proposed as part of the prep process before the originally planned April meeting. And we encourage partners to consider where they were in that planning process and to sort of reignite those activities, also considering our all changed experience in managing the COVID pandemic. So you see here both a country overview and a ministerial briefing note, meetings between finance ministers and sector ministers, and the addition of new mutual accountability commitments, as well as reviewing those existing commitments. As these activities are considered and pursued, please keep in mind ways of connecting to our call to action for national, regional, and global leaders to prioritize water, sanitation, and hygiene services in response to COVID-19. Many heads of state have signed on to this call, and it's key to stress the importance of hand washing in particular to prevent the spread of the virus to ministers of finance. Also, using the handbook, which Caterina Fonseca spent a great deal of time explaining to us, is one of the most important elements that can be used in the FMM preparatory process. So just to say, an electronic version of that handbook is on the SWA website, and government focal points will be receiving hard copies of that handbook. One way to tie all of these activities together and to drive momentum and attention to the WASH finance issues is to create an event or a series of events, if you will, a finance week. And in this case, partner messages can be united and amplified via public attention. So in support of Finance Week activities, the SWA Secretariat has a small amount of resources that could be put towards some of these activities. And as the regional coordinators begin to have bilateral conversations with governments and partners in each country, those ideas and opportunities for resources can be discussed further there. So additional information can be found in the guidance document. I realize that I'm not going into detail here, but government focal points and partners and countries should have received the guidance document for the preparatory process. It's also posted on, or will be posted on, the SWA website in case there's any additional questions or you're seeking some guidance and resources for preparation. So in this timeline, the colored circles represent each of the FMMs. And you can see the sections that identify the preparatory process. Given that the meetings are staggered, the length of the preparatory process is different in each region. Africa will have their FMM first in early November, followed by the Latin America and Caribbean region in middle November, and then lastly, Asia and Pacific at the beginning of December. So the activities that I just discussed in the previous slide, as well as those that you can see identified in the box in the lower left, should be taking place during that preparatory process. Again, the circles identify the meetings, but the preparatory process, or the process, really doesn't end with just the FMMs, that there's follow-up work that needs to be done once the FMM is over. So the SWA Secretariat is fully ready to support all of the partners in preparations for the FMM. And one way in which we do this is through webinars. For example, the one we're having right now, which is a global webinar, and as Katerina mentioned, is being translated into French and Spanish simultaneously. We will have another such global webinar in just a couple of weeks on the 24th of September, in which we'll focus on building forward better, and we'll consider some of the existing tools that can be used to assist countries in preparing that way. Then the next set of webinars will be staggered, again, because they are regionally focused to allow for a more contextualized conversation ahead of the finance ministers' meetings. And the meetings take place, and then we conclude with a final webinar to discuss ways forward in December. So on these last two slides, you'll see a set of ways in which the Secretariat can be supportive in addition to the webinars. Again, there's a lot more detail in the guidance note. But again, regional coordinators will start to have bilateral conversations in which you can go in depth about your planned activities for the preparatory process, ask for support, ask for guidance, and we'll be able to assist you. I do want to just draw attention to a couple of the items here. First is the updated costing tool, which UNICEF has developed. It's available on the SWA website in the tools portal. And we know that this has been a really useful tool in the past for countries as they've prepared for previous finance minister meetings and sector ministers meetings. And so we encourage you to look at this. If you need any support in understanding how to use it, the Secretariat is able to assist with that. And I'm sure we could ask for some UNICEF guidance as well if need be. The next is the country overviews. We encourage partners to develop these overviews in a multi-stakeholder way. And it's a tool that can be instrumental in efforts to brief ministers, to advocate with decision makers, and to drive media campaigns. It can be a source of information to support all of those activities. We have a outline for a country overview in the guidance note. And again, regional coordinators can be supportive in preparing those or giving guidance to do that. We will also then share on the SWA website any of the country overviews which are shared with us. So lastly, just to say again, to draw attention to the call to action and the handbook, we should definitely use those in the FMM process. In fact, one of the activities that could take place during a finance week is a handover between a sector minister and a finance minister of the handbook. We have a tremendous toolkit, communications toolkit, which could be used to support any media or social media activities in preparation of the FMM. So I breezed through that, and I will definitely be available to answer any questions that may come up in the Q&A session, but just to suggest again that the regional coordinators would be a huge asset and support as countries partner, or as countries prepare, excuse me, for the FMM. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Marissa, for laying it out. There were very interesting questions on finance that were asked in the chat. Regarding corruption, regarding what finance ministers can do to strengthen integrity in the budget cycle and ensure that all the funds reach where they have been allocated and used for the intended purpose. We think that these are very interesting questions that we took note of, which can then inform the different webinars that we are going to organize, the ones that Marissa referred to. Moreover, there were questions regarding what does smart investment mean? How is this different from conventional investments? I think that all of these important questions, a question from Mali, it would be necessary for finance ministers to allot more funds for feasibility studies on investment cases and projects. We take all your points. We are inspired by your questions, and we will be guided by them as we prepare the following webinars. We know that Mr. Canisius Kanangiri from AMCAO has joined the webinar, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Canisius, but since you are one of our regional co-conveners from a how shall I say it, from a political organization, maybe you can use you can take 60 seconds to make a statement to our audience. If you don't want to, that's also fine.
Well, no, I want to, and thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity. I want to say that indeed this is an opportunity for us to have the finance ministers meeting together with water and sanitation ministers meeting and discussing some of the issues pertaining to the region, zooming on specific issues and discussing the ways to address them and mobilize adequate resources. As all of you have said, when you analyze the situation, the key bottlenecks to the acceleration of universal access to water services is lack of adequate and sustained finance. In Africa, we have more other issues which will come next, like capacity building and others, but finance first. And we believe that with the meeting we will co-convene in November, we will respond or start responding to the call by the head of states of the African continent in 2008 in Sharm el-Sheikh, who asked AMCA to organize a platform for ministers of water and sanitation and their counterpart of finance to look into ways they can solve this rampant bottleneck. It will be the first time in next November to gather those ministers and initiate this platform on the African continent and zoom in to these issues. I hope it will be a very good beginning on which we will continue to build. I thank you, and I look forward to working with you, Katarina, and your team on this endeavor.
Thank you so much, dear Canisius. We feel the same way. We are looking forward to continuing to working with you and your team as we prepare for these meetings. I will now give the floor to our last speaker, and that's Mr. or Dr. Patrick Moriarty, who is our steering committee chair. Patrick, over to you for some concluding remarks.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Katarina, and thank you very much, everybody. I think to me this was a really exciting and positive webinar, and I thank everyone for being on it, because I know many of us are beginning to move to the end of webinar fatigue. Why do I think it's exciting? You know, we've heard about two initiatives. We've heard about the Finance Minister's Handbook, and I'd also add my thanks to our Honourable High-Level Chair, Kevin Rudd, for having bullied and cajoled us into finally spitting this out. And it's exciting because I think we're seeing movement towards the start of what may be the most effective finance ministers meeting we've had yet. And frankly, that's partly, I would say, thanks, if you're allowed to say that, thanks to COVID, because it's forced us to take this slightly different approach, building up through a series of regional meetings and regional webinars, which I think gives us the potential to have a more wider ranging and deeper involvement in the meetings. We heard several times statements about the critical importance of senior political leadership for WASH. We heard a lot about finance too, but I want to start by focusing on the senior political leadership. I think this, for me, as chair of SWA, and I know it's something that Katarina shares, this is the sector's single biggest challenge. Finance will follow political leadership. So I really want to thank our Nigerian colleagues for showing that. And I want to, echo what several people, including Jennifer, said. 2-3 years ago, we kept referencing Korea and the Southeast Asian states as examples of what could happen a generation ago when government really got behind water and sanitation. But now we're able to reference current existing cases. We're able to reference India, we're able to reference Nigeria, and I hope increasingly we'll be able to reference more such cases. And I think that the work we're doing with SWA at the moment, and which I'm very proud of, and I think we need to acknowledge the huge role that Katarina and her team have played, but also the leadership given by Kevin, is in helping a deeply nerdy sector to begin to break out of our comfort zone of talking to each other, to begin to talk to power, to bring, as we've always wanted to do, ministers of water together with ministers of sanitation, but even to move beyond that and to begin to talk effectively to presidents, to prime ministers, to parliament. I think that things like the handbook are really important and useful tools in doing that. And I would thank Kevin for the insight he brought as a former head of state in explaining to us as a partnership the sort of tools that would be of use to high-level politicians. I would ask that everybody go to the website, download the book if you haven't done it already. Look at it. Look at the fabulous tools, videos, illustrations that the Secretariat have developed to help and get the message out. And engage, please, with the finance ministers' meetings. I think those tools, those communications materials around the book are really useful to help to attract the attention of national ministers of finance, ministers of water, to encourage people to come to these FMMs and make them as rich and vibrant as we can. I've been asked to let everybody know, if you hadn't seen it already, that that the sessions are being recorded. So anyone who wants to see themselves speak or listen to any of the speeches that we've heard again can go and download that, I guess, later today from the Sanitation and Water for All website. And you can also go there and download the book, as we've heard already. So I think, with no further ado, I'm going to say once again, thank you very much to all of our participants. I know that how busy everybody is at the moment. It's greatly appreciated. I think it's very important. The leadership that all of the speakers, representing different aspects of the most senior leadership in our sector, have shown is critical. And I thank you for your time. I thank you for your commitment to SWA. I hope we can count on it going forward. I hope we can count on it as next year we continue to drive up our ambition levels in talking to the public, talking to parliaments and to senior decision makers. And I think you can expect to see SWA's ability to campaign and articulate what it is at that sort of level is only going to grow over time. And I think a final thing to maybe flag is that I hope very soon that we'll be adding to the leadership that Kevin already gives to us by expanding and creating a global leadership council. We're in the process of putting that together, which again will, I hope, greatly increase our ability to bring the case of water and sanitation and its importance to the highest levels of decision making. So thank you very much. Thank you to the Secretariat for once again organising an excellent and useful webinar, and wish you a great continuation of your day, and to see you in the FMM meetings later in the year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Katarina.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you for your inspiring words. Basically, what we want, as both you and Jennifer said, we want to turn the needle. We want to go for business as usual. We know that ministers of finance are key, but with the experience that we had, and to use our expression, thanks to COVID, in reaching out to heads of state and heads of government in the World Leaders Call to Action, we are convinced that we need to aim higher. The Global Leadership Council is part of our reasoning, but basically we want something simple. We want to create a global peoples and leaders movement for water, sanitation and hygiene that will allow us to reach SDG 6 by 2030 or even before. Thank you to all of you for your attention, for being here with us, and we are looking forward to working with you in the coming months. Bye, and have a good day, a good evening, a good morning, etc. Thank you so much.
you.